Hi, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Kai and this is Hot People Read. So, for the first time in 2 years, I fell into a reading slump, and it happened just around the time I joined the booktube community. Perfect timing. The moment I start talking about books, I fall out of love of reading, and it was so weird because, like I said, it's been 2 years and I went from enjoying reading and reading almost every day and enjoying the moment to struggling to even pick up a book. And I knew that I wanted to get back. I just don't know what triggered it. I don't really know what happened. Maybe it was a change of season. I have no idea. It was about time. 2 years of non-stop enjoying reading. Life is never that perfect. But I knew that if I wanted to get out of a reading slump, I needed to take a more practical approach to getting out of it. And here are some of my thoughts on how to get out of a reading slump, and I'll talk about those books that helped me get out of a reading slump in a minute. But if you don't want to hear about that and just want to get straight to the books, click on this timestamp. So to get out of a reading slump, I think the most important thing you need to do is switch up the genres. Get something new, get something fresh, a clean palette. Start with something that will really get your reading juices flowing. For example, my personal favorite genre is fantasy, and I knew that if I wanted to get out of a reading slump, fantasy was not going to do it for me. The plotline tends to be quite thick and heavy, and it's a very descriptive genre in terms of world building, and there's a lot of depth that goes into characters, and I just did not have the brain capacity for any of that. So I was like, no, I can't do fantasy. And the next tip I have is reading books under 300 pages, 300 or less. If you are in a reading slump, why would you make it worse by reading a 600-page book? We don't need that. Get a little skinny for now. I know if you like long books with depth and character growth, we don't have the brain capacity for that. So just get a short book. And number 3, get easy reads. Do not pick something with a super complicated plot. Don't get something about, a really intricate magic system and something that's really thought-provoking. No, get something chill, something easy, something light, something like a beach read, just something that will make it easier to read. I think that was the issue for me. It wasn't the books that were the problem. The books were fine. I was enjoying my time. It was more so the reading experience. I couldn't bring myself to stick to a book, as you know reading slumps can do. So here are some of the books that I read that helped me get out of a reading slump. The first book I'm going to talk about is Normal People by Sally Rooney. I'm sure everyone's heard about this book, but like I said, I'm more of a fantasy reader. I'm not really into, what is she like, literary fiction? Contemporary fiction? I don't know what genre, but those type of books don't really gel with me because I like things to be a little bit more, dramatic in terms of plot and the characters. And Sally Rooney, I don't think she's known for her drastic, groundbreaking plots, but I read it, Normal People, and I enjoyed it. I think I rated it 3 stars on my Bookstagram, which you can go check out in the description below. I didn't really have expectations going into this book, and I didn't really know what it was about. So Normal People, which I spoke about in a previous video, the Taylor Swift one, it's about our 2 main characters, Connell and Marianne. They grow up together, starting from secondary school all the way post-university, and as the reader we follow through their journeys, their ups and downs, as they try to navigate their relationship with themselves and other people. It also talks about familial bonds and transitioning from being a teenager into an adult, and how that changes the dynamics of friendships and relationships. It's a very easy to read, sweet book, but I didn't think it was as revolutionary as everyone else did. It has very high views. I feel like it's a polarizing book. I feel like people either hate it or love it. I fall somewhere in the middle. It got me out of a reading slump. It was super easy to read, and the main characters felt realistic to me. They felt fully fleshed out, and as somebody who just graduated from university, it was really fun to I could see someone going through the same stages I am as I'm currently going through it, which was nice. And it's set in Ireland. I don't really read much. I read 2 Irish books actually, but I don't really read much Irish literature, so it was nice to read that. And I don't know if it's just me, but when I'm reading a book where the characters are from a different country than I am, I read the dialogue through their accent. So when they were speaking, I was reading it through an Irish accent. But that's another thing, the dialogue in this book. There's no speech marks. There's no speech marks. I was like, I mean, it's not that hard to get through because Sally really does a good job of making it very clear when someone is or isn't speaking. But sometimes it will throw me off because I'll be reading about the description of a house and then suddenly somebody goes, oh, I really like your shirt. And I'm just like, what? That doesn't make sense. But yeah, the lack of speech marks really threw me off. But I know for some people that's not much of an issue. For me, it kind of was, which is why it was bumped down to 3 stars. And I felt that although the characters were realistic, they were lacking in depth. There was so much room for, I guess, if I'm out in a reading slump, I'm not really looking for characters with depth or, massive character development. I just want something easy to go with. So it did the job in terms of lacking depth because it helps me read it. But if I was to read it now, that's something that would have really bothered me because I like seeing characters being taken down to the core. There was so much that could have been talked about in terms of Marianne and her relationship with her family and her relationship with herself. I thought she was a very interesting character, but again, I didn't feel that it went deep enough for me. But I heard the TV show is good, and I've seen a lot of people talking about preferring the TV show over the book, so I would definitely check out the TV show. Another issue I had with this book is that I felt the plot was just so repetitive. It's a short book, I believe it's less than 300 pages or just above, and they just talk about the same thing over and over again. Like the main character, Connell and Marianne, they're constantly going back and forth, and I was just like, oh, I'm sick and tired of reading this. But again, it's easy to read. It will definitely get you out of a reading slump, and I see why people like it. I just don't think it was that fantastic. It felt like an average book. 3 stars isn't bad, but it's not revolutionary. That's just my thoughts. The next book I read was Zainab Takes New York. This isn't a book that's well known, I don't think. I just saw it in the library and I picked it up. So it was a short book. The cover was a black girl. I was like, I'm going to pick this up. So this book has a very interesting premise. It's about our main character Zainab, who moves from Ghana to New York in America for school. She's a struggling, I guess, artist, and through this, I guess, culture shock, she's trying to branch out a bit more and let herself go, as New York is, it's a city where people are more free, wild, and unhinged, especially because Zainab is removed from her family. She has like an uncle in New York, but again, she's not with her mum, she's not with her dad, so she's using this opportunity to expand herself and to take risks, mainly in the romance department. She's not very, I guess she's quite innocent in that way. She's not very sexually experienced, and she wants to change that. But while she's going on this journey of finding herself, through this, she starts hearing the voices of her ancestors, her female ancestors, specifically her grandma and her great-grandma and someone else. Maybe her great aunt, I don't really remember. But there are 3 ancestral voices that she begins to hear, and only she can hear them. And it's about her trying to, I guess, have sex and meet new boys while also battling the voices in her head from decades ago. And you can imagine the differences in opinions of Ghanaian women from the 1950s compared to a 22-year-old something in New York trying to expand herself. I was hooked just based off that description. I thought this was so interesting. It was giving elements of paranormal, but also, I don't know, it felt like a coming of age story for adults, which you don't really see a lot. I feel like most coming of age books are geared towards 15, 16, 17. You don't really see coming of age for somebody who is transitioning into the early 20s. And like I said, I finished uni, I'm in my early 20s. But But this book just really disappointed me. First of all, the main character is not likable at all, and that's fine. I don't need the main character to be likable for me to enjoy the story, but there was just nothing redeeming about her. There was nothing, she was just so insufferable, and I just couldn't connect with her. I don't know, I feel like when the character is so unlikable, it can make the story a bit more difficult to get to, but she wasn't even interesting. It's fine to be unlikable and interesting. Like, for example, normal people, I didn't really like the characters that much, but they were interesting enough. But she's very, how do I describe it? She doesn't really, she's there for character development, but she doesn't really develop in a way. She feels the same from page 1 to the end of the page, which I thought was a bit weird because the whole point of the book is about her development through her ancestors. Also, so I've got my notes. Also, there wasn't enough focus on the ancestors. I thought the book was going to really be the focus of that. I thought it was going to be about her unpacking what these voices mean, why she can hear her voices, and I guess unpacking that a bit more. It felt flat to me, and I think the author could have really taken that much further. And again, it had a weird ending. It just didn't feel conclusive. The beginning of the book, it builds up this, I'm gonna explore myself, I'm gonna be free, you know, it's giving Emily in Paris vibes, only for it to fall flat. And I don't know, I just didn't really like the book that much. It was kind of annoying, but it was an easy read, and there's some bi rep, and the themes are interesting. You know, it does talk about, again, generational trauma through the ancestors. It talks about culture shock, and talks about being a young black woman trying to break out of a certain narrative and just be herself. We get to see an interesting perspective of what it's like to have female friendships and bonds and what that means. But again, it kind of disappointed me, which is kind of a shame, because again, it could have been so when a book has so much potential and it just falls flat, it's like the worst feeling ever. But yeah, that's Zainab Takes New York, and I wouldn't recommend it, honestly. For a reading slump, I would, but not for the sake of enjoyment. If you want something thought-provoking, do not read this book. The next book I read was Luster. So Luster was really hyped about on, I guess, all reading platforms. I think was it last year and this year. And it's about our main character. What's her name again? I don't even remember her name. Oh yeah, Edie. So our main character, Edie, who's a 23-year-old black woman, and her life is kind of falling apart. She's in a struggling job that she's at risk of getting fired from, and she's in a relationship with a middle-aged white man who is married, and he also has a black adopted teenage daughter. Somehow, through a weird turn of events, Edie ends up staying at, this man's house who she's having a relationship with, despite him having a wife. But they have an open relationship, so it's not that bad. And it's supposed to tackle these really dark themes that, young women, young black women, people in America may experience. I guess people all over the world, but the main focus is on a young black woman in America. And I guess it's about her trying to transition again into adulthood, what that looks like for her. Coming out of uni, you're supposed to have this fantastic job, you're supposed to have everything sorted out and lined up for you, but that's just not the case for Edie, who doesn't really know what she wants, doesn't really know what she's doing. She has no money, she doesn't have anything going for her in terms of these so-and-so age-related milestones, and through this relationship we get to see the life of this privileged, somewhat wealthy, middle-aged white couple who have an adopted black teen, and what that looks like for them. So there's a lot going on. You have race themes, you have themes of wealth, and Edie's struggling relationship with her family. Again, this book just didn't do it for me. Maybe it's the genre, I don't know. I feel like, again, it had so much potential. I was really interested in this book. I thought it was going to be unhinged and I don't know, just groundbreaking. Maybe that's my fault for my expectations, but it did lightly explore some themes that I mentioned, which is nice. But again, I would have wanted just a bit more, not too much because I'm coming out of a reading slump, but I wanted something a bit more. I feel like this author I don't remember her name. Things like Raven. What's her name? Raven, yeah, Raven Leilani. I hope I'm saying that correctly. I don't think it's fair to put all those themes on one author. I don't think it's fair to expect this author to, really dissect these serious and tough themes in one book. That's not her burden to carry. But again, I think if you can't handle all these themes, focus on one. Just focus on one, and go into it. But again, it's not her responsibility to break down, micro racism, modern day racism. It's not her responsibility to break down the class divide in certain parts of the world. But there was a lot to unpack, and also this is a more character focused book, which again isn't something that I lean towards. I prefer more of a balance. As a fantasy reader, I like the plot to be deep and dark and intense, with similarly deep and dark and intense characters. But this book didn't really have a plot, I would say. It was more character focused, which isn't my preference, but it wasn't really a bad thing. But I guess that's why I didn't enjoy it as much. So if you do prefer more character focused books, I think you would enjoy the story. But another issue I had with this book was the wording, the writing style. This author, she's a great author. She writes beautifully, but it felt like it was too much. It felt like there was no editor. There was just so many words, like for no reason. Why does everything have to be a metaphor? It felt like I was reading a poetry collection dedicated to the furniture. Like, I don't need to know the ins and outs of the shape of a wall, or the curve of a painting, or every detail about what someone is wearing. It felt a bit too much. Like, chill, this is not a poetry book, this is a novel, which I found it kind of distracted me away from what was being said, because so much was being said, which doesn't suit me as somebody who was trying to get out of a reading slump. But I did enjoy the book. I don't remember what I rated it. I think it was 2.5 or 3 stars. So it will get you through, but again, it just didn't resonate with me. The next book I read is Orphea. I don't know the pronunciation, but I'm going to go with Orphea for now. And it's so beautiful. I'm surprised I haven't really heard about this book on, I guess, book related social media platforms, because this book is so, it's so whimsical and light. And again, I know I was gonna say stay away from fantasy, but it was a super easy read, and it was short. It didn't have a crazy thick deep plot, which was good for me. So it's about this woman who is the Queen of Fea, but she chooses to fall in love with a mortal man and have a child with him. And she decides to leave that world and enter, I guess, our world, our dimension. And because of that, she slowly starts to lose her memories. And eventually, she completely loses them. She does not remember that she was the queen. As far as she's concerned, she is a wife and a mum. And she's good with that. But unfortunately, she loses her husband. He passes away. And a few years later, her daughter also passes away. And she's trying to grieve and get over these 2 massive losses she's had, but she can't seem to get over the loss of her daughter naturally. And as she's going through this grieving process, she slowly stumbles back into this world of Fae. And the world of Fae, they're waiting for the queen. It's been, I think her daughter is like 18, so it's been a good 20-ish years since they've had a queen of Fae, and they're trying to get her back now that her grief somehow opened the portal back into the Fae world. And while they're trying to get her back, she's just confused. She's like, what is this? I don't know these people. Why is this world so strange? Like, what's going on? And why do they keep addressing me as queen? All she wants to do is get her daughter back. All she wants to do is get her life back. But she believes that through this weird world that is unknown to her, she can get her daughter back. That's what the world around her has led her to believe. So she's on this journey to getting her daughter back, while everyone around her is trying to get the queen back. And she stumbles upon these weird, mythical, mysterious characters who are, if you know anything about Fae, they're quite devious and sneaky and weird. They have this glamour that changes their appearance to make them seem larger than life. And they kind of play with her a bit. If everything feels like one big joke in this world, and she's the joke, but she doesn't know that she's the joke. But anyway, she's trying to get her daughter, she's grieving. But the interesting part is, each step closer she gets to getting her daughter back, this world is chipping away at her memories of her previous world, of her daughter. So she's trying to get her daughter back that she's slowly starting to forget. And I just thought the writing was so whimsical and sweet. It was what I needed. It was like an inner child book, you know? I haven't felt this way about a book since The Cruel Prince, and this book just made me feel so in love with reading, you know? It's so short, but it's so sweet, and the story was so tender. I think it's based off, what country? Is it Norwegian? Let me find it. Yeah, so it's a modern fairy tale novella that is set in... Okay, so it's set in modern London. That was the interesting part, the world building. So when she is in our world, she lives in London. But when she's in Fae world, it's London, but think of the upside down from Stranger Things. The trains look the same, the area looks the same, but slightly more whimsical. There's these vines growing on the trees. No one's really there. It feels like if London were some dark, magical fairy tale, and I loved every minute of it. I loved the description of the buildings, the grand palaces, the castles, the train stations even. And there's this gorgeous illustration in the book. So I'll put up a few pictures. It's so pretty. And the story, I believe it is also a child ballad. So again, it has that whimsical, light feel to it. The ending was so sweet, and it was just such a sweet story about a woman trying to get her daughter back, and elements of magic in it, and I really enjoyed it. It would definitely get you out of a reading slump if you're in one. The next book I have is Small Things Like These. I read this book like a few days ago, and again, I don't really read Irish books, but this is also an Irish book, and I'm so glad I read it. So it's about this man called Bill Furlong, but everyone calls him Furlong, and I believe it's set in industrial Ireland, like during the industrial period in Ireland. And Bill, he lives a pretty sweet life. He has his 5 daughters, I believe, and his wife. He's a breadwinner. His wife stays at home, looks after the kids. It all seems to be going well, and he's aware that he's quite lucky to have this home life, and he's aware how easily it could be taken away from him. But during his job, this is set around Christmas, so I think it's Christmas Eve where this happens. He stumbles upon something that he shouldn't have seen. He sees this unfortunate sight, I'm not going to say what it is, of a young woman, and I guess his conscience is stuck between 2 crossroads. He can either choose to ignore what he saw and get on with his life, or he could shake things up in the small town he lives in and interfere and do something and risk getting, I guess, in trouble with the institutions at hand. And it's about the things we are willing to do, the risk we are willing to take just to help out. Are we going to be a bystander, or are we going to take action and risk everything around us? And our main character, Bill, he's struggling with this. It's heavy on his conscience because growing up, his mother passed away from a young age, not a spoiler. And if it wasn't for the kindness of his mum's owner, and if it wasn't for the kindness of his mum's employer, he could have been in a similar situation. But instead, this older woman who had no familial ties to him took him in as a child and allowed him to grow up to be a functioning member of society. And now he finds himself in a similar position where he could help out. And again, it's about humanity, the things we're willing to do, and it was so sweet. I also believe it's a historical fiction, which is not a genre I tend to pick up. It's about the nuns? It's about the Magdalena Asylum / Magdalena laundries that occurred in Ireland, where these young women would be put in these horrible, I guess, institutions because they strayed away from society, which was usually through, like, if they had a kid without being married and things like that. And again, it's a cozy, is it cozy? It's a sad story, it's a dark story, but it's written in a cozy way. It's set around Christmas time. It's about family and love, and again, humanity, and I really enjoyed this book. But I did rate it 3.5 stars, not because it's a bad book, just because I'm not into historical fiction at all. It doesn't really interest me. So there was a part of me that was like, I don't really like this that much. but I could not deny that it was a good story. It was well written, and it won. I think it was nominated for the Booker Prize last year, or was it this year? I don't remember, and I can see why. I definitely think you should pick it up. It's a wonderful Christmas read. And the last book I read to get me out of a reading slump was No One Is Talking About This, which I have here actually. I returned the other books. This is the other book. This is the only book I still have. I DNF'd this book. I got halfway through. I got up to page 91, and this book is like 200 pages, so just under halfway. I had to stop reading it. It's so boring. So it's about... So our main character doesn't really have a name. Her name is Her. That's all we know. I haven't finished reading this book, so I can't give you a full idea about the storyline, but it's about social media, what it's doing to our lives, and how life is changing, what that does to our brain and our everyday lives. Just your regular commentary about social media through a fictional character. I thought this was going to be non-fiction. I thought this was going to be a non-fiction book about, I guess, social media through a more objective lens. I guess that's kind of my fault. I wasn't expecting an actual story. It was just so boring. Like, I just couldn't get with it. I think it's so interesting to read books about modern day life and technology and living through a screen, but this book just didn't do it for me. Like, I just couldn't get past the writing style. I get that it's supposed to be, you know, our main character, we're reading the story through her thoughts, and the thoughts are clunky. They're all over the place. You know, one minute you're thinking about what you're going to make for dinner, and the next thing you have a song playing in the back of your head, and the next minute you're thinking about what time you're going to go to bed. And that's exactly how the book is written. Patricia Lockwood did a good job of capturing human thoughts, because again, it's all over the place. But I just couldn't get with it. I thought it was so boring, and it hurts me to say, because one of my favorite booktubers, Jack Edwards, really rates this book, but no one is talking about this, and they shouldn't talk about it. Stop talking about it. I don't really know why it's popular, but again, I didn't finish it, so maybe it gets good towards the end, but I'm DNFing it. Why am I suffering to read this book? Reading is for enjoyment. I don't want to put myself back in a reading slump. So those are all the books I read for my reading slump. I of course forgot to film an outro, but thank you for watching, and I'll see you next week.